So a little recap. Um, Remember, we talked about don't believe everything that you think. Um, it's easier said than done. Um, but I think the way to do it, from my standpoint, is to think of the thoughts as voices inside your head. And I did an exercise years ago where I tried to identify all these different voices. Makes me sound sort of schizophrenic, I know, but there really are different voices, different characters, or different archetypes that you might think of. But the two main voices are really this victim and judge voice, and they really play off of each other. And how do you tell them apart is actually fairly easy. If you listen to those voices, you're going to become aware that there's again two main ones, and they're going to be the I voice, what I call the I voice, and the you voice. The I voice is always the victim voice, and the you voice is always the judge. So when you listen to this, you should be doing that. You did that wrong. You're no good. Whatever. All very judgmental. And I call that voice the judge. I should have put it in capital because um, it's strict. It's always critical. It's always condemning. And the I voice, whenever you're using that, it's if you pay attention, you'll notice that that is that always is associated with a victim type of voice. So pay attention to that. Don't believe the voices, but just listen to them or notice them or be aware of them and see how that how you where that takes you. So we're trying to basically become aware of our unconscious beliefs about ourselves. So that's the challenge, right? How do you know what your unconscious beliefs are about yourself if they're unconscious, right? They're not readily available to you. They're not in your consciousness necessarily. So that becomes a bit of a challenge. And so the way to do that is really, again, to look at the world that you see outside, your world. So as Marianne Williamson likes to say it, everything we do is infused with the energy with which we do it. So if we're frantic, life will be frantic. If we're peaceful, life will be peaceful. Another way to say it is whatever you believe about yourself on the inside is what you will manifest on the outside. I don't like to, sometimes people don't like that word manifest because it carries certain connotations, but you can think of it as it's at least what you see or what you perceive. That's probably the better way to see it on the outside. So the outer world becomes really in the psychological term, it's a projection. We can call it a reflection, a little bit easier to understand, is a reflection of your inner beliefs about yourself. So if you are filled with self-hatred, then you're going to see hate and violence in the world. So a couple examples of that. I'm going to actually use the battered woman example, I think, later on in a more appropriate place. But I had heard, I'll give you an example of what happened to me. I had heard this and understood it sort of, let's say, intellectually, right? This concept of the outer world that you see is a reflection of your inner beliefs about yourself. But I had never really had an experience of it. And 2 years ago or so, I was in the Dallas Fort Worth airport. I was flying to Vail for a conference, and I was supposed to be in a panel discussion on Saturday, and this was Thursday that I was flying out there, and it was right around this time. It was the end of February, and as I was flying out there, I picked to go through Dallas rather than Chicago. I had a choice, Chicago or Dallas. So I said, well, Chicago is always a mess. There's always delays. I'm going to pick Dallas because, that's weather's better and less delays and such. So I did that, and I left early Thursday morning, got to Dallas about 10 a.m., and I was supposed to leave at 11:30 for my connection to Vail. And we got on the plane around 11, and we taxied out around 11:30, and it was raining, and it was right around 32 degrees, and it was freezing rain. And so apparently the planes had to be de-iced. And so we sat on the plane from 11:30 till about 3. It was about 3.5 hours, and then we were in line to be de-iced, and they just don't have the equipment in Dallas to de-ice the planes like they do in Chicago. So, um, so anyway, they said, the pilot said, we've had you on the plane as long as we can, and we've got to go back to the terminal. And I knew what was going to happen. So he turned around and he went back to the terminal. And as soon as we got off, they said the flight was canceled. So, so I found a desk that didn't have anyone waiting. And the lady looks and she says, "Okay, I can get you to Vail on Monday." And I said, "Monday?" It was it was Thursday. My panel discussion talk was Saturday. I told her that, and of course, in her unsympathetic way, said that everything's full, and all these flights are canceled, and that's so. So I was, of course, determined that I was going to get to Vail, before Monday, and certainly by Saturday. And so, to make a long story short, all these other flights were canceled. The airport, it was a busy time of year, of course, and I was trying to run to a gate because there was a flight leaving for Denver, and I could figure if I could get to Denver, I'd be a whole lot closer than I could just drive to Vail. And so I was, but if you've ever been to the Dallas Fort Worth airport, that it's these terminals are like, they seem like they're miles long, and they may be miles actually. And so I was literally at one end, and at like, I can't remember the number, but it was like, 38 or something. I had to go to gate 5, which doesn't seem like it's that far. And I was, had all my stuff, and I'm headed to gate 5. And as I'm headed out there, the airport is just chaos. There's just masses of people, long lines at every desk, people trying to figure out what to do, people trying to get hotels. All the hotels are booked. And I'm sort of walking, very briskly through this terminal, and I'm looking at all this, and all I see is chaos. Now, let me step back and set the stage, because what had happened right around that time is the company I worked for had merged with another company, and things were very hectic. No one really knew how things were going to work, what was going to be happening, how it was going to be happening. I was in charge of the cardiology section, and it was just very chaotic. Fortunately, at the time, I didn't feel that stressed because I had been doing this kind of work long enough. But my thinking and my thoughts were certainly chaotic. I really, just didn't know what was going to be happening. Even once things came together, who would have jobs? Would I have a job? And stuff. And I remember as I started, as I was walking through the airport and seeing all of this chaos, I sort of started slowing down, and my thoughts started slowing down, and I just watched. And as I watched, all of a sudden, I said to myself, I had this, I don't know what to call it except for an awareness, that I said, all of this chaos is exactly like my thinking has been. And at that moment, I also realized it has to be this way, that it can't be any other way. And I can't tell you how big that was. That experience was enough to kind of, sort of bowl me over. I can't sort of tell the story with enough meaning or such to tell you the profound effect that it had on me. But ever since then, I've come to realize that no matter what is going on, it doesn't have to be a big deal. No, anything, everything is again, my reflection, my projection of what it is that I unconsciously believe about myself. That's what I see in the world. So keep that in mind as, whenever you're angry with someone, for instance, and then we'll talk a little bit about the work of Byron Katie, but if you're angry or have any other kind of negative emotions, then look, if it's anger, well, who am I really angry with? And it gives you something to work with, or as I like to say, play with. Right? Because you can consciously think, oh, I'm mad at this person because they did this to me, and that's it, right? But that doesn't do anything for you. It doesn't give you anything to work with or play with. But when you reflect back and say, what is this doing? How is this reflecting who I'm, that I'm really angry at myself? Then it gives you stuff to grab onto and to work with and play with. I hope that makes sense. Gandhi said it fairly eloquently: be the change you wish to see in the world. Well, the problem with this statement is when we read it, right? When he says, be the change you wish to see in the world, when we read be the change, we think do the change. In other words, we think, okay, if we want to see that, the dolphins aren't captured in the nets of tuna fishermen, or that, drunk drivers don't drive, or get penalized more heavily, or what have you. We're going to go out in our world and make our world a better place by making sure that they fish so they don't catch the dolphin, and they make sure that, people don't drink and drive and what have you. And that makes our world a better place. So that's doing. That's actually, I don't think that's what Gandhi actually meant, because he didn't say do, go out and do. He said be the change. But we have difficulty with that. So it's a little harder, I think, for us to understand what it is he was saying. Rumi said, yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself. I think that's easier to sort of put into what it is that I'm trying to get across. Again, what Gandhi said is what I believe. It's just I think it's misinterpreted. From my perspective, the way I put it is if you want to change the world, become aware of the unconscious thoughts you have about yourself. So again, if you have a lot of self-hatred, what you're going to see in the world is hatred and violence and all of these types of things. So life is as good as the relationship then that you have with yourself. We think it's about relationships we have with friends and spouses and significant others, but we never go back and look at the relationship we have with ourselves. All the other relationships are nothing more than a reflection of that relationship that you have with yourself. So that's that concept of awareness of your unconscious beliefs. How do you figure it out? And again, you use the world, your perception of the world around you, as a sign, as a signal of what those hidden unconscious beliefs are. Another step is this realization, this awareness that we're all the same, or as spiritual text would put it, that we're all one. It's really hard to understand that, right? I mean, how can we all be separate individuals? How can we all be the same when we look separate, we feel separate? I can touch you, you can touch me, we can touch this table. How am I the same as this table, or the same as you? Doesn't make sense to us, right? Because we feel like individuals. So it's a difficult concept for us, but it's really important. The Course in Miracles says, nothing more blinding than the perception of form. It's one of my favorite lines in the Course in Miracles. It really, it's because it feels so real, form, physical. How can we be the same, right? Yet, if you go to sleep tonight and you have a dream, right? That dream, when you wake up, you realize it wasn't real. It wasn't any more real than this, what feels real here in this physicalness. But you say, well, that was a dream. This is the physical. This is what's real. Well, remember, I'll remind you, when you're having that dream, right? When you're being chased by someone with a knife, it feels real. It feels like he's going to stab you and kill you, right? In fact, when you wake up, if you wake up at that moment, your heart's racing, your palms are sweaty, your blood pressure's up, your body's reacting exactly as if that was going on. But it's not. And this isn't any different. And so I use that analogy of the dream in that this, what feels like the physical world, is the same thing. This is really nothing more than the dream that we had last night. It just feels more real because we feel like we're in form. Lao Tzu, who wrote the Tao Te Ching, said, he said, I woke up this morning having a dream that I was a butterfly. And now I don't know if I'm a man having a dream that I was a butterfly, or if I'm a butterfly that's now having a dream that I'm a man. It's hard to know. So how do we find this oneness, or this sameness? At least if we can't find oneness, how is it that we can at least find concepts where we're all the same? Well, one place you can do it is in unworthiness and feelings of not good enoughness, as I like to say. That's one place where we're all the same. I don't care who you are, again, with a few handful of people who are, extraordinary, but they're so rare that we will pretend they don't exist for this purpose. For the rest of us mere mortals, none of us feels completely worthy, and none of us feels completely good enough. In fact, most of us feel no good or not good. So that's one place where you can start to see where we're all the same. Feelings of unworthiness and not good enoughness. So who here feels completely worthy and good enough? All the time? Okay, not all the time. How about some of the time? What about ever? Right? And you can use this as the foundation to understand all human behavior. Again, I'm not saying that that's the end all and be all. What I'm saying is that it can be used in this way that we're going to talk about, and it can be very helpful. All right. So if any of you heard of Byron Katie, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about Katie, but I'll just want to use as an example how I developed this this cycle of not good enoughness to help you just see where it came from. So in Katie's, what's called the work of Byron Katie, which I think I told some of you that the thing that I told Katie was I didn't like about the work was that she called it work. And I said, this is not, I've got enough work to do. I don't need something else to work on. So I like to play with it, right? So she calls this inquiry, and she's got 4 questions. Is it true? Can you absolutely know that it's true? That's actually a different question if you think about it. Again, we're not going to spend too much time going through how she does this. How do you react when you believe that thought, and who would you be without the thought? And and you can do this on anything that's going on in your life. Usually, it's done on your what she's called your judge your neighbor worksheet. So it's done against or with other people, whether it's whatever relationship issues you're having, whether it's at home with spouses or siblings or children or at work or what have you. Okay, friends. But the powerful thing about the work isn't the 4 questions, which you have to kind of do, but it's the turnarounds. Okay, this is really what I like to say where the magic happens. And so, as you're doing these turnarounds, what for me, as I was doing the work, and I went to the school of Byron Katie, and what I found for me was the key in all the turnarounds was always there's many turnarounds, but the one turnaround that was always the key was the one that related to me. So if I had an issue with someone, uh, you know, um, whatever it was, when you turn it around and look, I don't, have an issue with, uh, Sam because he doesn't listen to me. And so one of the turnarounds is I don't listen to me. And so as I did all of this work, uh, what I found with all these turnarounds was that at the end, no matter what the issue was, it always came back to the turnaround about me. And it was that in that turnaround, it was always that I wasn't good enough, or I was unworthy, or I had shame, or what have you. And so I said, okay, well, this is very nice. But the problem with the work is you got to sit down and do this work, right? You got to get your judge your neighbor sheet out. You got to kind of go through the questions, and it's it's doable, but it's work, and you can't really necessarily, unless you get really really good at it, do it on the fly. And you can get pretty good at it, but it takes a long time. I wanted something that I could do more on the fly, and you also have to do this work many times. Kind of funny story I got when I was at the school with one of the facilitators, but I don't have time to really talk about that. But suffice it to say that I used this, and I said, okay, I created this cycle, and I said, let's just say if it always comes down to that turnaround, I said, if I start out with the idea, the concept that I'm not good enough, and you can say that this is as in any way you want. You could call it self-hatred if you want. You could call it that I'm not good enough. You could, because some people say, well, I'm no good. Well, I don't always think that I'm no good. So not good enough softens a little bit, or that you have shame around something. But this is a state of being, right? That I'm bad, but this is unconscious. These aren't generally conscious thoughts. They may come to consciousness at times, but it's not generally conscious. Okay. So if you just start with that, I'm no good. So again, it's an unconscious thought. So we don't, since we're not thinking it, what we really say is that we do this what I call the victim thingy, where we say it's not my fault that I'm no good. This is what I call the victimization trap. So that's what we say. That trap, that unconscious, it's not my fault, leads to feelings of inadequacy or unworthiness / guilt. Right. And then the guilt tends to dictate our behavior. I did something bad in order to prove that I'm no good, which then creates our story. So Katie always talks about, who would you be without your story? I never really understood that until I got into looking at it this way. And I started to see that our story is really our identity that leads to our suffering. And that story then provides the proof that fulfills the unconscious belief that I'm no good. And there's the cycle. Cycle's completed. The neat thing about this is that self-awareness or self-acceptance or self-compassion will break this cycle at any part, at any one of those arrows. So if you take an example, you might have a middle-aged kid who I said middle-aged, I meant middle child, right? And uh, and let's just say he's doing he gets off on the wrong sort of uh, place in life, and he's doing what we would think societal wise are bad things. Okay, and we go back and we start to look at um, in therapy sessions, we start to look at, well, what might someone like this, have done that would cause these kind of behaviors. What, because we always have to anchor it to something, right? But if I always looked at my case when I did this, when I looked at me and some of these, my feelings of not good enoughness, when I look back at my childhood or go back to whatever, there wasn't anything to anchor it to. I didn't have, a bad childhood. I wasn't, abused by my parents. I didn't have, I wasn't bullied in school. I didn't have, any of those issues. So I didn't necessarily have anything to anchor it on. So I made it up, and I created this imposter syndrome, or this imposter that I couldn't basically live up to. So you see, it doesn't matter whether you have something going on in your life that you can anchor it to. You can say, "Oh, my parents, abused me, or I was bullied, or I was, my first girlfriend, left me, whatever it is." When we look at it that way and we anchor it, then what do you do with it then? Right now, you've got she's that way because her parents abused her when she was little. Well, again, that just sort of gives you this excuse, right, for whatever behavior this person then created. That created the behavior, created the story, right? And then the story is what gives additional credence to the "I told you I'm no good." And you can do this in two different ways. You can either do it directly and prove it, right? So people who do bad things in our society, criminals, murderers, rapists, drug dealers, all these, right? They're basically saying, they do this behavior and they say, "I told you I'm no good." And if you sit down and you talk with most of those people long enough, you will find that, so they're victimizers, right? But you'll find that every victimizer was a victim at some point in his life. So they were victimized in some way, a lot by their mother and things like that. But bad things happened to them. That doesn't make what they did right. That doesn't condone their behavior. Doesn't make it. It's not even an excuse for their behavior, right? It's just what they said. I'm so no good, right, that not even my mother loved me because she abused me, or my father, or whatever. I hope that makes some sense. And so you can use this in that way. Now, the other way is, instead of the direct way, which is again the bad people in our society. Fortunately, that's a less common way of doing it than the more common way, which is the cover-up method. And in the cover-up method, you actually are super good in the what appears to be the real world. In other words, you got someone who works hard, goes through college and through medical school, becomes a doctor, works 80 hours a day, 80 hours a week, does community service, does missions in Ebola clinics in West Africa, right? And everyone says, "Oh, look at him. He's such a good man," because he's doing all those things. And in this cycle, again, you don't have to look at it this way, but I think it's very helpful and it gives you something to look at. You look at that, and you can do this in every situation. You would say, oh, yes, what a good man. But what all of that is coming from is unconscious beliefs about not being good enough, right? And then they say, it's not my fault, right? And so then there's that guilt, and the behavior here tends to be very, let's call it socially acceptable behavior. And that creates a story of a guy who goes to these Ebola clinics and does community service and works really hard, and he's such a good man, right? And that, again, is the cover up for the feelings, the unconscious feelings of I'm not good enough. So those are the two, and the only two ways that's used. Okay. And that can be used in every situation, 100% of the time. And we could sit here and talk about this cycle for hours. We could actually sit there and talk about it for years. And I've done that. That's what I've done, and a lot of people have done it. But it takes that long to start to be able to look at it this way, because that's not what we're trained to do, right? In our society, we're trained. What do you mean you're no good? You are good enough. You can do this. You can do anything, right? And that's again, those are conscious thoughts. That's what we're trying to believe. What I'm talking about, this is coming from the unconscious. All right. So here, the battered woman example tends to be a good one. So if you go back up here, so you have a woman who feels that she's not good, no good, and she says that's not my fault, but she has guilt over that, and then she believes she should be treated poorly. So here's the weird thing about the battered woman, and this is not 100% case by any means. However, it tends to be that you hear this, right? The woman who gets out of she's in a battered relationship, and she gets out of that, and she gets into another relationship that's also where she gets battered. It may be different. It may not be physical. It may be emotional, but nonetheless, right? And then she maybe gets out of that one, and she gets into another one, the same thing. And then she finally, she's seeing counselors, and she says, what's wrong with me? Why do I always pick men who abuse me? And this is very common, right? Until the counselor finally says, well, what's the common denominator in all these relationships? And it's the woman, or it could be a guy too, but in our society, it tends to be more women, right? And so that's how she believes she needs to be treated, and that's the story she creates. Now you say, okay, well, how is it that she's going to attract these kind of men, right? Like, she doesn't know which guy's going to be abusive and which is not. Well, yes and no. So this is where I like to call the button pushing thing comes. Okay, so it's an energetic sort of thing. So when she's out looking, dating or whatever, a guy, if she finds a guy who has a personality type, who's shy, who's not very aggressive, who's sort of, in our society, what you call maybe nerdy, maybe, right? She might say, I'm not attracted to him, and not go out with him. Now, in her mind, she thinks it's because physically she's not attracted to him. But from this perspective, it's that energetically she's not attracted to him. She sees another guy, who's got a more aggressive personality. He might be, more fit, more a bodybuilder type maybe, or whatever. He's more of a fun guy. Maybe he's kind of got that bad boy kind of personality, right? And she's attracted. Now, in her mind, she thinks this is physical. Oh, because he's a good looking guy. And I'm attracted to him because he's a good looking guy. But again, if you base it on this cycle, she's really attracted to him because he has the personality that is more likely to treat her the way she unconsciously wants to be treated. Or I shouldn't say wants, because that's it probably unconsciously believes the way she deserves to be treated is probably a better way to say it. He's going to treat her more likely the way she believes unconsciously she deserves to be treated. Right. And so she's going to create that behavior that then leads to the story of the battered woman. And the interesting thing is, if you notice this, you see this actually in the Ray Rice video in the elevator when he hit her. What people don't talk much about was how she provoked him. Now, I'm not saying what he did was right, that he should have hit her. Of course not. But again, in what you see sometimes in these situations is that, the woman, if she's not being treated the way she unconsciously believes she deserves to be treated, she will try to provoke the behavior. Nothing I said there is condoning or saying that is right. Please understand that. Okay. But she is trying to create the story that then provides the proof about her unconscious beliefs about herself. Again, we could talk about this all night, and it takes a long time because this is really, I don't know if it's ringing true for anyone, but this is really something that is a different view than what we're used to. All right. The other thing is that life, as we've talked about, is lived completely in our head. What does this mean? Well, again, perception dictates the emotion, not the event. Okay. The event, remember, is neutral. It's how you perceive the event, or how you choose. All this about choice. That's the key here. The event is neutral. How you choose to perceive the event is the key. I think I told the story of the adoption. I think I told this in both sessions earlier. But I'll tell it again just in case you didn't hear it. So years ago, actually a couple decades ago, I had a friend who adopted a boy from Romania. The kid was 2 years old. Him and his wife were both PAs. They went to Romania and adopted this boy and brought him back. Mom took her maternity leave, which was 6 weeks. He took a little bit of time off. And then around 4 weeks after they had been back, they decided to take this kid to daycare and start to get him used to it, because he was learning English and all this sort of stuff. So they bring him there, and they stay with him for about 30 minutes or so, and then they were going to leave for about just 5 minutes and then come back and get him and go home. That was the plan. So they spend about half an hour with him playing, and then they go to leave. And as they go to leave, the little boy goes nuts. He has a tantrum. He freaks out. He starts screaming. And Mom freaks out, and she says, "Forget it. I'm going to quit work. I'm just going to stay home and take care of him, and you'll work, and we're just going to have to make it on your salary, and that's just the way it is," and a discussion. It's kind of a, not probably a normal type of reaction that many would have. My friend told me I was overjoyed. And I was like, "Overjoyed? What are you, like some kind of freak?" He said, "No." He said, "You don't understand." He said, "My biggest concern in adopting the boy was that he was 2 years old and he would never bond with us. And when he started screaming, I realized he had bonded with us and I was overjoyed. And he kept talking at that point, explaining, and I stopped listening because all this was before I looked at any of this. All I could think was, wait a minute. This is the same event, which most of us would see as an unpleasant event, the way his wife did. The kid is screaming. She doesn't really know necessarily what to do. Yet, there were two 180-degree opposite reactions to the event based on some preconceived notions, right? And where I went with that was, wait a minute, maybe it's not the event that dictates our reaction and makes us victims, but it's a choice that we make. Now, their choice was based on, again, preconceived notions, but maybe we can choose our response every time. Every time. And that's what has borne out with all of this is that as you saw in that first slide of that first webinar, was this concept that it's really not the event, but the choices that we make on how we will react. So again, from my perspective, if you want to change the world, become aware of the unconscious beliefs or thoughts you have about yourself. A belief is nothing more than a recurrent thought. If you want to change the world, become aware of the unconscious beliefs you have about yourself. So life is an offering. This is a picture of Route Highway 58 right near my house. These here are the Blue Ridge Mountains. And this is, we took this picture, my son took this picture as we were driving to California now 4 years ago. I can't believe it's been 4 years. And this was the very beginning of our trip. I wasn't aware of this then. I became aware of it later on. This is outside Denver. So these mountains here are like 3,000, 4,000 feet, the Blue Ridge. These mountains here are like 8,000 or 9,000 feet. Later on in the trip, as we passed through Denver and went hiking in the Blue Ridge, these mountains were like 11,000 feet. And as we walked and hiked along the Blue Ridge, you know, I think the trip was supposed to be a little bit, it was supposed to be fun. It was hopefully going to be a bit of a bonding experience. We hadn't spent a lot of time together in a long time. But I think I got a lot more out of it than he got in many ways. I sort of started to have this awareness that everything in the universe is really simply offered. It's given. You know, the universe is continuously giving free of charge and without expectations. There's no expectation of return, no expectation of payment, expectation of favors, right? Zero. It's just put forth and made available to everything. It's offered free of charge. And most importantly, it's offered without judgment. And it's also all done without work or action. There's no doing. There's only being. If you look at the sun, the moon, the mountains, the trees, flowers, air, water, rain, everything is simply being what it is and offering what it is. It's offering all of that. So I looked out at these mountains, and they stood there, right, in all their, we'll call it majesty, right? And I sort of sat there wondering, what makes this mountain majestic, like so magnificent, right? It's just sitting there. It's not, doesn't seem to be doing anything. They're just being mountains, nothing else. They weren't working to be better mountains. They weren't trying to be smarter mountains. They weren't trying to be skinnier mountains, right? They weren't trying to move up in mountain society. They weren't trying to keep up with the other mountains. They weren't trying to help the other mountains. They weren't trying to learn more, do more, have more, look better, right? They were simply being what they are, what they were, which is mountains. They freely offered their land and their slopes, valleys, and gorges, and they allow the water to run down them and form streams and river that provide water. Seeds accept the nutrients from the land, right? The trees grow. Trees produce leaves and fruit. The leaves and fruit fall to the ground. They return all the nourishment to the land. The fruit and land provide food and shade for the wildlife. And it's all free of charge. It's all free of expectations. And it's all offered without judgment. You know, I remember looking at the sun at one point. I said, the sun sheds its light equally on everything and everybody, saint and sinner alike. It doesn't withhold its light from anything. It doesn't judge, right? It doesn't say, you're a bad person, you're a sinner, I'm not going to share my light and energy with you. It just shines. It shines, providing light and heat and energy to everything. The light is taken up by the trees. It's used for nourishment that produces oxygen that the trees offer freely. The oxygen combines to form with air and forms air and water, which are used freely by all of us, right? All living things. And as I, as we were hiking, I remember I was overcome by this thought of this offering. I just remember sitting there crying. The tears are flowing down my cheeks, and I'm sitting there trying to appreciate, all of this offering. And then I started to feel really undeserving at that point. Right? I had feelings that were overwhelming, shame and unworthiness. And I started to have this just thoughts running through my head that all I did was take and take and take and take. And I didn't really offer anything in return. And as I sat there, I started to realize that become grateful, and the tears changed from tears of unworthiness to tears of gratitude. And then there was tears of embarrassment and disgrace, and more thoughts kind of rushed through my head. And that was weird too, because the sun and the trees, they didn't really appear. They don't have any shame or embarrassment. There doesn't seem to be any level of self-hatred among the flowers or the rain. The smaller mountains don't seem to be jealous. Those Blue Ridge Mountains, they weren't jealous of the taller mountains of the Rockies. The sun doesn't believe it's not big enough or bright enough or good enough, right? The sun knows what it is. The mountains know what they are. The trees and flowers and air and animals all know what they are. It seems like it's only us humans who seem not to know who we are. Or maybe we've just forgotten that we're all the same, that we're all one with everything. We've worked hard and managed to cover over who we are with layer upon layer of stuff, right? Mostly material stuff, but a lot of emotional stuff, physical stuff, spiritual stuff, all sorts of stuff. And I suspect that life's ultimate challenge is not to figure out how to get wealthy so you can buy more. It's not how to sell more of your trinkets to people who already have more trinkets that they know what to do with. It's not to read more. It's not to learn more so that you can be more knowledgeable than all your friends. It's not to get leaner or more muscular. It's not to get in better physical condition so that you're healthier and happier. I suspect in the end that all those things added together don't amount to anything truly important or valuable. From my perspective, life's ultimate challenge is simply to become aware of who we are. The next greatest challenge is being at peace with what you find. So, who are you? And when I say that, I'm not talking about your roles and what you do, right? Because most of us have no idea really who we are without our roles. We're supposed to be human beings, but we're really more human doings, I think. I did an exercise many years ago while I was working. I set up a spreadsheet and a timer, and every 15 minutes, the timer would go off, and I would try to recall all the positive and negative emotions that I had. And I didn't necessarily label them because remember I told you I wasn't very good at labeling my emotions, but whether I felt good or bad. And there were two big awarenesses. The first awareness was that the negative emotions outnumbered the positive emotions 10-1, which is probably not surprising. I didn't think it would be quite that skewed, but it was 10-1. But more importantly than that, every single positive emotion, every single good feeling, 100% of them were associated with getting something done. There wasn't one positive emotion. There was not one good feeling that was associated with anything else except checking something off the to-do list, getting something done. So that, and I think that's true for most of us, right? We don't think anything of ourselves unless we're doing something, or we judge everything, our lives and who we are about what we've done. We have a day where we check off everything on our to-do list, which probably never happens, but you check off most of the things on your to-do list, and that was a good day, right? We were good today because we got all of our stuff done. And we were bad another day because we didn't get anything done, or we only checked 2 or 3 things off of a list of 8 or 9. And lastly, meditation, and you can think, if you don't like to think of meditation as meditation, like in the formal sort of sense, you can think of it as prayer, because we remember in the very first session, we talked about contemplative prayer, which is really just a meditative prayer. It's really, I don't think, doesn't have to be complicated, and it can actually be fun. And if you notice these small gaps, that's the place to start. Pema Chodron talks about one time she was learning how to meditate. Many of you know her, is very famous Buddhist monk. And she, for years and years and decades, whatever it was, she, just never could, quote unquote, get good at meditating, right? And I used to always beat myself up. I would meditate, and all I did was judge the meditation. That was such a good meditation today. I sat there, 30 minutes flew by, and oh my God, I my thoughts seemed still, and which probably meant I fell asleep or something. And then, but usually it was, meditation sucked today. I was, fidgety, and my back itched, and I couldn't scratch it, and it was just terrible. It was always, a judgment over the meditation, and that went on for, again, decades. And I really started to. It took me a long time to begin to understand that I'm making this way more complicated than it is. But I heard not too long ago Pema Chodron to give this example one day when she was meditating and she was in some room and there was one of these big fans like in the window, and it was one of those making a lot of noise, but it's white noise, right? Because it's there and you don't necessarily hear it. And so she's sitting there meditating, and then the electricity went off and the fan shut off, and it was silent. And the fan was off for about 10 seconds. And then it started back up again. And all of a sudden she says, "Oh my God, I think that's it." She said, "It's that small gap, that I'm sort of looking to achieve." I don't know what people you're supposed to achieve in meditation. I have no idea, but I can tell you this, is that where I am now and where I've gotten is where I notice it's really the thoughts. I call it the voices. But rather than try to stop the thoughts, which I've decided is not possible, and I don't know what really happens to these monks who, say they can do it. I have no clue. I don't really care. But as I listen to these voices, I don't believe them, but they're fun to listen to because they're constant, unending, ceaseless, right? And as you sit there, and they're very tangential, right? They just kind of run away, and then you suddenly realize, you're thinking about what you're gonna make for dinner, or that you're not gonna have time to make dinner, and where you're gonna stop to get dinner, and and you can use the breath just to bring you back to that place. But it's really not. There's really nothing to it. There's really nothing more that you have to do than being still. And in that stillness is more important than we emphasize in our society, no matter what spiritual tradition you look at, including Christianity. Even in the Bible, it says, "Be still and know that I am God." And I think that's, to me, what that's talking about is that's prayer or meditation. But we're not, the problem with it is that we're not getting anything done during that time. And so many of us have difficulty with it because we're not getting anything done. Oh, I don't have time, right? Because I've got all this other stuff to do. Or as you're sitting there, your mind's racing, as you're planning your day or what have you. But it doesn't have to be that complicated. And the focusing on the breath makes it easy. So if you just stop now and you close your eyes and you take a deep breath in and you get to the very top of that breath and just notice that gap. No breath, just for a second. And then you exhale. And at the bottom of that breath, there's that gap. No breath. Silent. And so it just gives you something to focus on if you choose to do that. So I like to use the breath a lot in meditation. I encourage you to do that because that's where the self-awareness really comes from. I can't tell you how it works because I have no idea. But I can tell you it's very important. Katie says, when you believe that your problem is caused by someone or something else, you become your own victim, or you become a victim. That's what this is all about. And when I say that, you say, okay, well, I'll blame myself. I'm not talking about blame. It's not blame, it's responsibility. Taking responsibility for your choice of how you choose the event. You may not have caused the event. You may have had nothing to do with the event, but your perception of the event is what you have control over. Robert Holden said, no amount of self-improvement can make up for any lack of self-acceptance. And again, I like the term self-acceptance better than self-compassion, because you see it's just easier, I think, to not misunderstand. Self-compassion can be easily misunderstood. No amount of self-improvement can make up for any lack of self-acceptance. I love that. And two of the greatest qualities to have in life are patience and wisdom. And this is one patient and very wise dog. All right. Any questions? Threw a lot at you. While you're coming up with questions, if you have any, this is the end of the slides. So we've done 3 webinars. I'm hoping this recorded. I don't know if it did or not now. I think it did. I hope it did. I think it did. Anyway, we'll find out. It was supposed to record automatically, but I'm not even good enough to make that happen sometime. So I think what we'll do next time is maybe just do a couple exercises. We'll see what kind of response we get. If there are any questions or issues, please email them to me. I spoke with a friend today, and she is willing to bring up some of the stuff that she's gone through. She's been going through this program for a long time, many years, several years. And so maybe we could have her on, and you can at least begin to see how you might relate to this cycle, and how you might use this cycle constructively to help you in life, not just for yourself, but in relationship. And her example was really a really good one, and it's not too personal, so that we don't have to worry about all that. And so we may, if you think that would be helpful, we can do that as well. If you have any suggestions, please let me know. Again, this is still an experiment. We're still trying to figure out how to make this work, the best way to make this work. And in the end, again, you've sort of heard all the material, most of the material. It's not that the material is not difficult or challenging. The hard part about the material is learning how to apply it to your situation, or to every situation. So we got a question: how do you gain self-acceptance if not through self-improvement? Yeah, that's a great question, Emily. And that's the hard part for us to understand, right? It's the idea that the problem is that we relate all of our goodness, again, in our doing, right? In other words, we never. I like the way Leo Buscaglia put it. I think I said this in one of the things. He said, you have to love yourself, fat thighs and all. And it really isn't until you can fully accept yourself as you are at this moment that you can then change, right? That's what Carl Rogers said, right? The paradox, that curious paradox, is that once I accept myself as I am, then I can change. And so the problem, Emily, in the way you sort of look at it, is that when you feel that the only way you will be better is only if you improve, right? Then you have to be doing. So what that signifies is that you're no good as you are right now. I have to do more and have self-improvement to be better. Then I can accept myself. Well, the problem with that is once you then improve to that next stage, then you're still not good enough, because you have something else that you are going to, you're leaner, but you're not lean enough, or you're more muscular, but not in the right places. right? That makes sense. So it's not that self improvement is bad. Nothing wrong with self improvement, right? It's the fact that, sort of getting to the place of, and I don't use the term loving yourself because again, it's so hard, but accepting yourself as you are now doesn't mean you have to stay there, right? But until you can accept as you are now, really nothing else can change. Hope that helps. Any other questions? We did pretty good on time. Great. Thanks, Emily. All right. Well, I appreciate we had great attendance tonight. Appreciate all your participation and tuning in. And we'll plan again. It seems like the Sunday nights work best for most people. If we go to once a week, maybe we'll do Sunday nights. But there's definitely a group that likes to that can't do Sunday nights, can only do the weekdays. So anyway, we'll keep this up for now. Please, if you have any questions, like I said, do email them to me. It gives us something to talk about. Otherwise, next session, the fourth session, will probably be the last one. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.